The FDA moving ahead with approval of anti-malaria drugs as a potential treatment for coronavirus patients. The health department saying in a statement, quote, the FDA issued an emergency use authorization to BARDA to allow this drug and chloroquine phosphate products donated to the Strategic National Stockpile to be distributed and prescribed by doctors to hospitalized teen and adult patients with COVID-19 as appropriate when a clinical trial is not available or feasible. Let's talk now to Dr. Devi. She joins us. She's a practicing physician, of course, and founder of Metropolis Pain Medicine. Dr. Devi, thanks for coming in.
Nice to see you.
Good to see you. The significance of this move by the FDA.
Well, I think this is a great thing in terms of giving patients wider options, a greater access to the drug. So, normally, what would FDA approval mean? So let's say 3 months ago, if something did not have FDA approval, there were a lot of barriers to people actually having access to it. First thing is with the pharmaceutical companies, for example, they're not allowed to market drugs for off-label use, meaning something that's not FDA approved for that purpose. Mm-hmm. So pharmaceutical companies might hesitate to actually ramp up production. They can't answer a lot of questions about it. With the emergency FDA approval, they actually can build up their stores so at least people would have access to it if it works. It also gives them the ability to market it in other countries, for example, and since this is a global pandemic, that is important that we should help our neighbors as well. The second thing is for patients, before the FDA approval, they also had to face a lot of red tape, for example, if they wanted access to it. And for doctors, they might hesitate to prescribe it because they don't want to get sued for using things that are off-label. So in general, the FDA approval doesn't change how the drug works. It doesn't change whether it has a benefit or whether it has risks, but it makes it a little bit easier for doctors to have those discussions. The
president, obviously, and his team, they've been bullish about the possibility here. He's had his critics who want to hear both sides on this. This is the former FDA chief scientist who came out and criticized the emergency order, saying, quote, I would like to see who signed off on this, despite the total lack of scientific evidence that chloroquine, hydroxychloroquine are beneficial in the treatment of COVID-19. It's supposed to be issued when the evidence indicates that benefits outweigh the risks. So talk about the risks here when the French, for example, have already moved forward and have said they understand the risks, but they want their patients to have this.
Well, the difference is that, there are observational studies. So that's what the French are using, where people take the drug and then they seem to do better. And for a lot of people, that's enough when you're looking around and people are dying. So many people are dying, and this looks like so horrible for the entire world. But on the other hand, let's say in an ideal situation, if a new drug was coming out, what you would do is you would separate the people who are taking, joining the study into two groups. So only half the people get the actual drug, half the people don't get the drug, and then you compare the two groups to see if the people who got the drug actually did better. Mm-hmm. Problem here is that with people dying and there's not really much other alternative, not everybody wants to sign up for those studies because that means you're taking a chance that you might not actually get the drug. So I think those studies are needed, that's what we want. But I think it's going to be very hard to get those done at this time. And we don't want to shaft certain people and deny them access to things that might work. Of course, they have to understand it might not. There's still a lot of uncertainty.
There's also breaking news this morning from Johnson & Johnson saying that they've made progress on the potential for a vaccine. But that obviously they would move forward on trials in September. So this is still some time away. And even if that works, they don't think it would be feasible until early 2021. So this, again, is months down the road. So as we wrap this conversation, you just mentioned the deaths that are happening right now. It's increasing in America and around the world at an alarming rate. When you think about the worst case scenario from Dr. Fauci, where he said up to 200,000 Americans could die, and you think about the horror of 9/11 when about 3,000 people died, how do you as a doctor put this in some perspective for us?
Well, it's hard. I try to just keep going with what we can do. I think about the patients who are suffering from coronavirus, but there's actually a lot of patients without coronavirus that are also suffering because they don't have access to the doctors as easily as they would have before. So I agree. This is a war. We have to do whatever we can to actually fight it. But of course, it's the virus that's our enemy, not necessarily all the, the people that we're working with or the institutions we're working with. But it's hard to know what the right answer is.
Yeah, well, coming together can certainly help. You're certainly right about that. As the president's talked about a wartime footing, and so we've got to all come together and fight this. Dr. Devi, you're at the front lines. We appreciate you coming in and giving us some perspective. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sandra?
Fox News alert now. The U.S. Navy hospital ship Comfort arriving in New York City today, bringing some desperately needed help for hospitals overwhelmed by the coronavirus and their patients. The ship set to arrive around 11 a.m. Eastern time this morning. We are going to bring you that arrival live when we see it come in. Plus, volunteers setting up a massive field hospital in New York's Central Park. New details on the response from the epicenter of this pandemic. And after passing a $2 trillion rescue plan, Congress seems divided on what happens next. Nancy Pelosi wants more legislation. So what are Republicans saying?